I've always thought of my neighborhood as a safe place. I've lived here for years, and nothing ever really happens. It's one of those quiet suburban areas where people mind their own business and everyone feels comfortable leaving their doors unlocked during the day. It's that kind of place. But after what happened last week, I've started locking my doors all the time. It was late, around 11:30 p.m., when I heard a knock at the door. Now, that in itself was strange. I wasn't expecting anyone, and it's rare to get visitors, especially at that hour. My first instinct was to ignore it. Who knocks on someone's door that late, especially unannounced? But the knocking persisted. 3 steady, firm knocks every few seconds. Not frantic, but deliberate. I hesitated, but eventually, I got up to check it out. I peeked through the small window next to the door, and standing there, illuminated by my porch light, was a man I didn't recognize. He looked to be in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, with disheveled hair and wearing a dark hoodie. His clothes were a little dirty, and he had this uneasy look about him. I could feel my heart rate pick up. Something about this situation didn't feel right, but not wanting to be rude or paranoid, I cracked the door open just enough to speak through. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to sound casual. The man smiled, but it wasn't exactly comforting. "Sorry to bother you so late," he said. "I'm lost. My phone's dead, and I was hoping I could use yours to call for a ride. I've been walking for hours, and I don't know the area too well." Everything in me was telling me not to let this guy in, but he seemed harmless enough, polite even. Maybe he really was just lost. I didn't want to be that guy who slams the door on someone in need. So against my better judgment, I stepped back and opened the door a little wider. "Sure," I said, gesturing for him to come in. "Just a quick call, though." He thanked me and stepped inside. As soon as he did, I felt a wave of unease wash over me. There was something off about him. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it was there. A strange tension in the air. He didn't make small talk, didn't ask questions, just stood there looking around my entryway. I handed him my phone, and he dialed a number. He brought the phone to his ear, but I couldn't hear anyone on the other end of the line. He didn't speak right away either, just listened for a moment. Then, after what felt like way too long, he said, "Yeah, I'm here. I'll be there soon," and hung up. I wasn't sure what to say, but I forced a smile. "Everything okay?" I asked. He nodded, handing the phone back to me. "Yeah, thanks for that," he said. "Sorry for the trouble." There was something in his tone that unsettled me. It was like he was too calm, too collected, like he wasn't really worried about being lost or stranded. He looked around the room again, his eyes lingering on my things, my coat by the door, my shoes lined up neatly against the wall. It felt like he was studying everything. I started to feel more uncomfortable. I wanted him out, but I didn't want to be rude. "Well, I guess you should get going then," I said, moving toward the door. He nodded again, but he didn't move right away. For a brief second, I thought he wasn't going to leave at all. But then, without another word, he stepped out onto the porch. I locked the door behind him as soon as he was outside. After he left, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a mistake. I stood there for a few minutes, listening to the silence of the house, trying to convince myself that it was just a weird interaction and nothing more. I double-checked all the locks, made sure the windows were closed, and then went to bed. But I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up throughout the night, feeling like something wasn't right. The next morning, I woke up early and went about my usual routine. I turned on the TV while making breakfast, flipping through the channels when I caught something on the local news that made my stomach drop. The anchor was talking about a man wanted in connection with a string of violent home invasions in the area. The police were warning residents to be on alert, especially those living in quiet, suburban neighborhoods like mine. As the anchor continued to describe the suspect, my blood ran cold. They described him as a man in his late 30s, wearing a dark hoodie, often targeting homes late at night, claiming to be lost or in need of help. He was responsible for multiple break-ins, some of which had ended in violence. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The description matched the man from last night perfectly. I felt sick to my stomach. I had let him into my home. He had stood right there, inches away from me, and I had given him my phone, letting him scope out my place. I'd been alone with him, completely vulnerable. I called the police immediately and reported the incident. They sent someone out to take my statement, and I showed them the news report. The officer listened carefully and told me I'd done the right thing by calling. They would keep an eye on the area and let me know if they found anything. But they never did. It's been a week now, and I can't stop thinking about that night. Every time I look at my front door, I remember his face, his calm demeanor, and the way he looked around like he was planning something. I've installed new locks, security cameras, everything I can think of to feel safe again. But no matter what I do, I can't shake the feeling that he'll come back. And next time, I might not be so lucky. It was a Friday evening, and I was coming home late from work. The weather was awful. Rain pouring down in sheets, making it hard to see more than a few feet in front of me. I was tired, just wanting to get home, take a hot shower, and crash on the couch. I was driving down a stretch of road that cuts through some pretty rural areas. Not much around except for trees and the occasional house. That's when I saw her. An old lady standing by the side of the road, drenched from head to toe. She was holding a small bag and looking miserable. My first thought was that she must have broken down or something, and with the weather being so bad, I couldn't just leave her there. I pulled over and rolled down the window. "Need a lift?" I asked. She looked at me with these tired eyes and nodded. I didn't think twice. I unlocked the door and she climbed in, dripping water all over the seat. She looked even older up close, frail and hunched over, but she had a soft smile that made me feel like I'd done the right thing. We didn't talk much during the drive. I asked her a few questions, where she was from, if she needed any help, but she mostly just nodded or gave short answers. I chalked it up to her being tired and cold. The rain was still coming down hard, and the wipers were struggling to keep up. We reached the gas station, and I pulled in. I turned to ask if she needed anything else, but when I looked over, she was gone. The passenger seat was empty. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't heard the door open, hadn't seen her get out. I quickly got out of the car, thinking maybe she'd slipped out when I wasn't looking, and went inside the station, but she wasn't there. I asked the guy behind the counter if he'd seen an old lady come in, but he just shook his head. I went back to my car, confused and starting to feel a little uneasy. The passenger seat was still wet from where she'd been sitting, so I knew I hadn't imagined it, but there was no sign of her anywhere. I tried to shake it off, telling myself she must have just wandered off, or maybe had a ride waiting for her. It didn't make much sense, but I was too tired to think about it. I got back in the car and drove the rest of the way home. I didn't get back until around midnight. The rain had finally let up, and I was exhausted. I went through my usual routine, shower, a quick snack, and then straight to bed. But I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the old lady, wondering where she'd gone. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. I must have drifted off at some point, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up in the middle of the night. Something didn't feel right. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, just this heavy sense of unease. Then I noticed it. There was a weight on the bed, like someone was sitting at the foot of it. I froze. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I was too scared to move. I didn't want to look, didn't want to confirm what I was already dreading, but eventually I couldn't take it anymore. I slowly turned my head, just enough to see out of the corner of my eye. There was someone crouched at the end of the bed. I couldn't see their face, just a dark shape hunched over, like they were trying to stay hidden. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. My throat felt like it was closing up, and I couldn't get a sound out. I don't know how long I lay there, too terrified to move. It felt like hours. At some point, I must have passed out, because the next thing I remember is waking up to the sound of my alarm. The room was bright with morning light, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe it had all been a bad dream. But when I got up and went to the front door to leave for the gym, I saw that it was unlocked. I know for a fact I'd locked it the night before. My hands started shaking, and that familiar sense of dread washed over me again. I called the police, trying to stay calm as I explained what had happened. They came and checked the house, but they didn't find anything. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing. They told me it was probably just a coincidence, that maybe I'd forgotten to lock the door in my tired state. But I knew better. I knew what I'd seen, and I couldn't stay there anymore. I packed up my things and left that same day. I didn't care if it seemed irrational. I wasn't spending another night in that house. I don't know what happened to that old lady, or why she disappeared from my car. I don't know who or what was in my room that night, but I do know one thing. I'll never pick up a stranger on the side of the road again. For years, home invasions have taken the world by surprise. It's daunting to think that we're safe in our home. It's our domain, yet the thought of nobody being safe anywhere can haunt the minds of many. The story told by many generations, glorifying the reality of a world so cold, will summon chills down your spine. Hide your kids, no one is safe. This is the story of Jack. He lived a normal life, had a wife and 2 kids, and got an average job as an accountant. His wife was a stay-at-home mom. One day, he received a letter in the mail from an unsuspecting person. The letter read, "Hello, I am the Watcher. To get straight to the point, you have 2 kids on the 2nd level of your home. You are downstairs, down the hall, and to the right. Shall I pay a visit one day? Take your things and kill you all one by one? I should get going. See you soon." Jack saw this and looked out the window. There was a black van outside. Jack went outside and started walking toward the van, but it drove off before he could get to it. A couple of days after that, a brick was thrown through the window. On that brick there was a note, and the note read, "I'm coming tonight. Be prepared to die." With that, Jack took his wife and kids to the basement and said, "Stay here, all right? I'll be back. Don't open the door unless you know it's me." He gave his family a hug and went back upstairs. Jack hid in the living room behind the couch. All of a sudden, someone was trying to kick the door in. The door swung open. A man walked in with a clown mask on, an AR-15 strapped to his chest, and a Desert Eagle pistol in his hand. The man said, "Hello, I'm here. Time to die." Jack jumped up and charged him, punching the masked man in the face. The man didn't seem fazed. He raised his pistol and shot Jack in the chest. Jack fell back on the floor. Jack was still breathing when the masked man walked up to him and said, "Say goodbye." Jack replied, "I will die happy." The masked man raised his pistol and finished Jack off, shooting him once in the head. His wife, hearing the shots, knew what had happened. She knew her husband was dead. Then there was silence for what felt like an eternity. Then the children started to cry. The man heard this and went to the basement door and jiggled the handle. Then the man started to kick the door. The man walked down the stairs. He ordered everyone upstairs at gunpoint. Once upstairs, he ordered everyone on their knees. "Whom shall I shoot first?" "Maybe your children, and make you watch," the man said. The mother screamed, "No!" He shot the mother in the head. The children started to cry. The man shouted, "Shut up, stupid kids!" The kids, not wanting to die, stopped. The masked man walked around, pondering what to do. After a while, he decided to tie the children up and put duct tape on their mouths. With the kids tied up and taped, the man took off his mask, revealing a disheveled face. He kneeled down to the kids and said, "This is the last look at your parents. You're coming with me." He put sacks on their heads and placed them in the back of his van. He got in the back with them, ripping the sacks off their heads. The man said, "I'm going to put these bags on your heads." With that, he put a plastic bag over the first child's head. After a while, she died. With the same bag that killed her brother, he put the bag over the second child's head and killed her. After he was done, he placed the bodies back in the home beside their parents. And then the man said to himself, "Wait until dark." The man left and never returned. The aftermath. To this day, no one knows who murdered the family. Maybe a hitman out for blood, or could it be a psychopath, not in his right mind? I guess we will never know. Stay safe. Goodbye for now. When I was about 7 years old, my younger brother and I lived with our grandma. It wasn't anything unusual. Our parents were busy working a lot, and Grandma had a nice house in a quiet neighborhood, so it just made sense. Plus, we loved staying with her. She made the best pancakes in the morning, and her stories at night always helped us fall asleep. That was until one night, the night I'll never forget. It was around 10 p.m., I think. My brother and I had already brushed our teeth and were getting ready to go to bed. We shared a room at the time, and Grandma was downstairs watching her usual late-night shows. I remember the TV was on, and we could hear the noise faintly through the floorboards. Everything was pretty normal, until the knocking started. At first, it was quiet, almost like tapping. I thought it was maybe just the wind or something, but then it got louder. 3 slow knocks, evenly spaced, like someone was taking their time. I sat up in bed, and my brother asked me, "Did you hear that?" I nodded, but we both figured it was probably just Grandma moving around downstairs. Sometimes she would knock on the walls while hanging up pictures or cleaning something, so we didn't think much of it. But then we heard a voice, a woman's voice, coming from the front door. It was faint at first, like she was far away. My brother asked, "Is Grandma talking to someone?" I thought maybe she was. Maybe a neighbor had stopped by or something. But the voice kept getting louder and closer, and it didn't sound like Grandma at all. It was raspy, almost like a scream, but not quite, and the words were hard to make out. But one word, one name, stuck out. She was calling for someone named David. "David! Dead!" she called, her voice cracking as she repeated the name over and over. I felt a chill run down my spine. I didn't know anyone named David, and I sure didn't know why someone would be outside our house calling that name. My brother was looking at me with wide eyes, and that's when I knew he was scared too. I whispered, "Should we get Grandma?" He nodded, but neither of us moved. We were both frozen, listening as the woman kept shouting that name. And then suddenly she started banging on the door. Not a knock this time, full-on pounding. The sound echoed through the house, making the walls shake. My heart was racing. I could hear her outside, her voice desperate and angry like she was trying to get in. "David!" she screamed again, louder this time. And then she said something that sent chills down my spine. "Let me in!" That's when I finally screamed. I shouted for Grandma, and my brother started crying. We were both terrified, huddled together on the bed. We could hear Grandma rushing up the stairs, her footsteps quick and heavy. "What's going on?" she asked, bursting into the room. "There's someone outside," I cried. "She's banging on the door, and she's calling for someone named David." Grandma's face went pale, but she didn't say anything. She just told us to stay in the room and locked the door behind her as she went downstairs. We could hear her talking, but we couldn't make out the words. The banging had stopped by then, and the woman's voice had faded into the distance. After what felt like forever, Grandma came back upstairs. She looked calmer now, but there was still this uneasy look in her eyes. She told us everything was fine, that it was just some confused old lady, and that she'd called the police to come check things out. She tried to reassure us, saying that the woman had probably just gotten lost or something. The police showed up a little while later. They didn't find anyone, but they said they'd keep an eye on the neighborhood for the rest of the night. We didn't hear any more banging or shouting, but I couldn't sleep after that. I kept thinking about the woman, how desperate she'd sounded, how hard she'd pounded on the door. The next day, everything seemed normal again. Grandma didn't talk much about what had happened, and we didn't ask. But for the rest of the time we lived there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that maybe the woman would come back. She never did, at least not that I know of. But even now, all these years later, I still think about that night. I still hear her voice sometimes, calling for David, and I wonder who she was and what she really wanted.